Here we're going to disconnect this yellow plug down here. It's for the airbags. Connected. Just thick yellow wire goes to the airbag, to the clock spring. Little white keeper here. Going to take out. Looks like that. Then you're going to want to turn your wheel this direction. There are little clips. There's a rectangular slot back in here. There's little clips you have to release. There's one on each side. Okay, that took a little bit of fiddling. So what I ended up doing, from the instructions I've seen, you don't have to take off the plastic here, or on the bottom of the column, or this piece either. But I did end up taking that off just to see how that clip really worked. So what holds this piece on, let's see if we can get it back here. I don't know if that's going to focus or not, but there's a rectangular cutout just held on by a little Torx screw, and that there's one on each side, and that'll make this plate loose. And so what you really want to do right here, you can barely see this clip, this wire right here, right at the end of my screwdriver. It needs to be pressed one way, and that releases this shaft right here that's attached to the airbag. So what I ended up doing is on this end you can see that little spring clip. It's got two sides here. So that's part of the spring clip right there, and then below it is the one you actually need to pry on if you're going to do it this way. So you just press this down. It's going to press like that, and that's going to release this part of the airbag, and then you'll do that on the bottom. I wanted to show this a little bit better, or how to get the airbag out. So you can see there's this little bar in here. That's what secures the airbag module. And what you have to try to do from the back side is to push this bar out of the way to one side, and that's what releases it. And then I already showed you a way to do it from the side. Once you take this cover off here, that's how I managed to do it. Okay, the airbag's off. This little ground wire, press it straight in, turn it, probably either direction, about a half turn, or a quarter turn probably, then it'll just pop loose. I've got a 13/16 for the wheel. this airbag wire out of here. Okay, now is where you probably need a puller. So I'll go get a puller, get it attached, and I'll be back. Okay, I've got the puller on there, and it looks like this steering wheel's splined so they can only go one way, and it's got an arrow pointing to it, so it should be pretty safe to take it off. So I gotta trim my plate here for my switches, and then I'll be back to change out the clock spring. Okay, we've got to take a snap ring off before we get the clock spring. And there's a certain way you have to twist these clock springs. It actually has the instructions right on it. Rotate it all the way clockwise until it stops. Then counterclockwise at minimum of 2 turns. 1, 2, and keep going until yellow comes up in this window. So now there's yellow down in this window, and then you have to line up 2 arrows right here. Hope you can see that. It's ready to go on here. Snap ring back on. Here I got the controls on my factory wheel. Had to trim this plate. Got a little carried away on some of it. A little better on this side. And here's the plug for the controls. We'll have to figure out where they're going to go in here. I just wanted to show you some pictures, some better pictures of how I mounted the radio controls and trimmed the bezel. So I used machine style screws with washers and nuts, and I think they were 8/32 machine screws with about 3/4 inch threads on them. So you can see how the controls mount to the body of the steering wheel. Here's a picture of the backside, and don't worry about how the wiring is routed here. I actually ended up changing that. And I also, you might have noticed some of the screws, they were different sizes. For all the work that I did on the bezel and for the screws here, I just used a Dremel with a cut-off wheel. That cuts through the plastic really easily. And I also cut down some of the little screws, made them a little bit shorter. That probably wasn't actually necessary. And so you can see in this picture, this is the only fitment issue I had for the back bezel. There was just a little bit of interference with the bezel and the nuts on the back of the screws. So here's a little bit different shot of it. And I've got it circled in red. And here's what I did. I just had to grind off a little bit of the back bezel piece. And you can see that circled in red here. And also here. And that gave me the clearance for it to sit flush the way it should be. Here is shown how I cut out the original trim piece to fit around the radio controls. It is not a very good job. So originally I had the wiring from the switches routed above that bracket, and you can see the little cutout there. And then I figured out I could route the wiring underneath that bracket, so that would leave you, if you do it that way, then instead of making that extra little notch there, you can just make a straight cut across there, and that'll turn out a lot nicer. So I made an outline here of where you should actually make cuts, and this would be the tightest fit against the switch body, and it would probably look the best. Of course, ideally you would pick up the correct bezel trim with your clock spring and switches. The bezel that actually comes with these switches covers the whole switch body there and covers up all the wiring. So if you can get that, that would be the best way to go. But if not, if you cut it out along these lines here, it should look pretty good too. Okay, I want to point out a few things. I actually ended up removing my wheel 2 or 3 times because of various issues. The second time, I think, is because I had to retrim this bezel, which I just showed you for I had to trim out for the nuts there to make it sit flush. And then if you see on this picture, the tape is kind of loose in the picture, so I just had to take the wheel off again to fix that. So you can see here I've circled in yellow. Make sure all that wiring is taped up good, and also make sure it's tucked up close to the metal piece there, because if any of that's hanging too loose, it can actually rub on the clock spring or other pieces of bezel on the steering column and just make noises that's gonna annoy you. And I ended up re-zip tying it. So I showed that here in green. You run 2 zip ties to keep those wires secured close to the metal part of the body there. And then here's the picture from the top side. Those same 2 zip ties, they come through those holes. And then here's with the wheel installed. You can run, that's showing the zip ties again, and then there's one other zip tie that's actually in the picture installed. And that keeps the entire connector from being loose in there. Keeps it nice and secure as well. And hopefully, if you can, even jack up your vehicle, get the wheels off the ground while you're doing all this, and then once you get the wheel connected again before you reinstall the airbag, if you can just run the wheel in both directions and make sure there isn't any other noises, that would be the best way to check, because once you get the airbag back on, that's kind of a pain to take off again.
Okay, I've got this all tied up. It's ready for the airbag. Here's the wiring that, if you read in the other forums that show you how to do this, this is where they usually leave you on your own. This comes from the new piece I put in from the clock spring. So I've cut off the connector that was on there. Yellow, I'm thinking, goes to your positive 12 volt. The gray, that'll go to a dimmer switch, positive. Black's going to be ground. And then this green one over here should be the data for the steering wheel controls. And then I'll show you where they plug into on the OEM controls here. So I push the green cable up here into the radio cavity. So here's the plug that goes into the back of the radio, and it goes like this into the back. Black connector is on top. So I flip it over, the gray connector, from what I've looked at and researched, your data control for the steering wheel is going to go in right here next to these other 2 green wires, just like that. And I don't have a pin to put in here, so I've just bared this wire, folded it in on itself. I'm just going to shove it in there and at least test it this way and make sure that that's the correct pin location. And if it's right, I'll probably just secure this wire to these other wires if it's making a decent connection.
So here's an image of the connector, and I have you can see the light green cable going into that pin that I showed you, and then I have both the black and the gray connectors pinouts next to here. So you can see the light green, I have little lines drawn here that shows which pins go to which wires. So it's actually pin number 14. It's designated as steering wheel controls, signal input. So that's just another visual for you to see where that goes into.
Okay, the wiring was correct, the way I came up with it. Yellow goes to your hot, black ground, gray will go to dimmer power to give lights to the switches, and green to the radio. So I got these
all heat shrinked, and I'll put them up in here, tie it all up, and let me show you. I'm not going to connect. I've just got my brown loose here, so I'm not going to show you how to connect that one. There's multiple places you can tap into. So right here is the MBEC or mid-BEC. So this is under the driver's side footwell. Little plastic nut here. You can unscrew or just pull it off. And then you pry both sides at the same time. There's these little ears on this plastic black cover. Pry outwards. And then it should just come forward like this. There's one little ear right here that might get stuck on something, but okay, so this black connector right here, it's called the SEO connector. So it's pretty much made for upfitters. So if you want to add extra electrical items to your truck. So it's got a constant hot 30 amp, and it also has a 15 amp. I believe that's a constant hot also, and those are factory fused under the hood here. See right here, SEO2 and SEO1, 30 amp, 15 amp. These two right here. So you already have a 30 amp and a 15 amp power source inside of the truck, ready to go. Now, you might be able to still buy these connectors on eBay. I haven't looked for a while. Or you can look for them on, some of the GM parts websites, or just go to a dealer even that might have them. And that's a really nice place to tie into some aftermarket electronics you want to add. I have a couple of diagrams of the MBEC. I'm going to post them here. So here's the SEO connector itself. It uses MetroPack 280 female terminals. I believe those have to be the tanged terminals to lock in there. And so the view of this connector right here is actually, if you were looking at it from the terminal side, not if you were looking at it with the wires sticking outside. So if that matters to you. And then it has all of these are the factory wiring colors. If your vehicle had an SEO connector, this is the color of the wires and everything, and the circuits and the functions of what they would do, and the pinout. Okay, and then I also have this other diagram of the entire MBEC itself. And then I've also labeled the pins on this little blowout here. So these are the actual pins. You can go back and forth between, just pause the video between the connector and this. So the two bottom pins here, F and A, those are your factory fused pins there. So you've got the 30 amp on the bottom left and the 15 amp on the bottom right. And then, of course, always, check your vehicle. If you get a multimeter and make sure that these are correct. So this is what I found on my truck. So just pause the video if you need to look at this more. And then one other thing to take note of, when you put it all back together, make sure your airbag's working. Up here, usually when you go to start, position the key, the airbag will flash like 7 times, and then it should turn off if everything's working correctly. So just make sure that works. I'll try to add some links in the description on proper way to disable your airbag. And that should be about it. I got my radio. It's back in there. I'm going to put all the dash back together. I tested the controls and they're working, so hopefully this helps a few people trying to add on to their old trucks. So thanks for watching.